So what's Enterprise Connect, this series? It's a regular series of seminars, if you haven't attended one yet, and networking events aimed at bringing together really students and staff from King's College London with investors as well as service providers and entrepreneurs from the external world, all to talk about entrepreneurship, the benefits, the skills that's required, and so people can build up a growing awareness of what's involved, pique their interest if possible, and have networking events after these talks so you can connect with people that you can use to make it happen.
Now, what people often ask me is, why did I get into this? Why did I want to start a company? And the answer is that it started from a relatively young age, in that when I was at secondary school, I would go around, I would collect scrap metal and I would sell it to scrap metal merchants to make money. I came from a working class background with no money. Work was very important and you had what you could afford. So I came from that sort of, not academic background, but I came from a background of basically surviving and wanting to succeed and wanting to make money. And so I came and I became an academic. I'm a neuroscientist, and I always had an eye for business, and I'd done a lot of work with the pharmaceutical industry. And what I saw when I looked around me at King's College was I saw all the components of a pharmaceutical company, with the exception of things like regulatory toxicology. And I saw also my colleagues busily doing their research, publishing their paper, and giving away their intellectual property. And what I thought was, well, this would form a great business if we can go into drug discovery and drug development. There's a company called IP to IPO, which was which is now called the IP Group, which specialized in buying up tranches of intellectual property at universities. And they did a deal with King's. And the promise of money always focuses attention within an institution. And to our surprise, £400,000 was forthcoming to set the company up. Now you may say, why do they give us £400,000? And I have to say, to this very day, that remains much of a mystery, because all we had was 4 ideas that I'd written on the back of an envelope. What we marketed was the fact that Ken Mulvaney was a serial entrepreneur, and he'd already made money for the boys in the city, so the boys in the city trusted him. Bruce Campbell had successfully developed many drugs from the pharmaceutical industry over a 30-year period, so had a track record of being able to take basic science and turn it into drugs. And I came along, and at the point I was in my career, I don't like to boast, but I was top of my pile. I was a key opinion leader in the neurodegenerative disease disorders. What we did was we showed we had focus, we showed we had a strong management team, we had a diversified risk business model in which we promised to kill off weak projects as soon as possible. And we already had another advantage, and that was we were running a service business for the pharmaceutical industry, testing drugs for their potential use in Parkinson's disease, and we were already turning over £800,000 to £1 million a year in revenue, which was attractive to any small business. So in 2005, we had our day at the stock market. This is what happens to you if you get successfully spun out. You go along and the name of the company is displayed in bright letters, and you can see us all up there. We're cheering, we're looking very rosy. It's the end of the dream. Actually, it's only the start of a very long road in developing the company and making a company turn from an idea into a success. This is a high-risk sector. Failure, in fact, is usual in the biotech field. And what you have is, in many cases, what I call the lunatics running the asylum. And that is, the academics are left to their own devices. The difficulty with that is academics are very good at spending other people's money. And sometimes they only have one idea. And if that idea is weak and goes down the tubes, the company goes down the tubes with it. And killing projects early, which is not something academics find easy, is something that you have to imagine will be the outcome of starting a small company like Proximagen. And it was a bumpy road. Research, if you're an academic, you'll know, never goes as well as you hope it will go. And what you end up doing is you're burning money, and in fact you're burning other people's money. The IPO, amazingly, within 2 years, raised 25 million from the markets, with the college getting £1 million in cash off the table at the start. We became the Times Higher Education spin-out of the year, and we did everything we could to support our share price, seek investment, get partners, and offset our R&D costs off the bottom line. And that's how it worked extremely well. But for any academic who's thinking of going into this, you have to bear some factors in mind. And that is, if you dance with the devil, you lose control of what you have, because other people are the shareholders of your company, and you don't, unfortunately, have the ability to spend all that lovely money on nice academic research and progressing academic ideas. And you suddenly find out that the CEO and the CFO are your masters, and that with the mantra of every penny is a prisoner, it's not so easy sometimes to push on with your world-shattering research ideas. And we had a change of philosophy, and this is me as Socrates being given hemlock by the other directors of the company because of the change in philosophy and my academic principles being hurt by this, but it was the right thing to do. We moved away from just having our own basic research. We moved into looking at acquisitions and clinical development, and moving ourselves from an expensive research-based company into something which was a more virtual company and which would take later stage projects and turn them into something that could be marketed at an earlier time. You have to ensure that you have some sort of long-term strategy which involves an exit plan, because small biotechs cannot afford the £800 million it costs to develop a drug up to market status. And so you need either to get big partners, or you need to sell the ideas of the company to a bigger pharma company who can then take over and invest that money. So in 2012, the for sale sign was up, and we were bought by an American-based company called Upshur Smith. We were sold for about £350 million. This was probably the biggest entrepreneurial windfall the college has ever had, and I hope one of the objectives of these meetings is to publicise perhaps a little more the success that we had with Proximagen and how it originated out of ideas that emanate from King's College. Is this for everybody? No, it's not. You've got to have it in you, or you don't have it in you. I don't think you can learn entrepreneurial skills very easily. You've got to be thick-skinned. You've got to be very focused and driven. You've got to be able to take stress. You've got to understand what a company is all about. A company is not just a way of an academic getting funds to fund their basic science research. You must be prepared to give up control, because if you go to the market, somebody else will own the shares in your company, and you must be able to make hard decisions, and you must be able to accept that you're not always going to succeed and there may be failure. If you do this once, you want to do it again. It's almost addictive. If it's in you, you don't want to have one idea, you want to have multiple ideas, and once you've done this with one company, you will want to do it with another company, and I commend you to follow your dream and have your moment of success. Thank you very much indeed.
My question to you is really personal. Did you want to sell the business?
Do you want me to be truthful about
Yes,
that?
please.
Yes, yes, yes. From the very start, I came from this background where we had no money. We never had a car. My mother only ever had a telephone in later life. I had to go next door and watch colour television. So that was that sort of background. And having money and being successful and achieving financially was very important to me from the very outset. So once I put in my ideas into this, and my ideas started this process, and once the company then taken on a life of its own and it was expanding away from where we started, my feeling was that at my point in my career and my life, I wanted to see the company sold, because we would never develop a drug on our own.
I guess in a way it's a transition from look what I've done to look what we've achieved.
Yeah.
You know, it's realizing your dream.
Yes, yeah. I always wanted to have some sort of commercial business success. And I'll be quite frank with you, if I was starting again, I would not be an academic. It's too difficult these days to be an academic and succeed. I would have actually gone into business in the first place. I would have done something that had a commercial arm to it, and I would have been in something that tried to generate money. So it's inherent in me. It may not just be genetic, it's probably environmental.
The way I tell this story is personal because it is very personal, and because it also gives you some insight into how much luck and chance is involved in these journeys. And so here I am with a bunch of equipment that we developed, all this stuff on a big crate here, which stabilised these glass plates. So what we were making were tunable optical filters, very large ones. So these are this big, and they're polished flat to a nanometer, and they act as a kind of resonant cavity for light, rather like a laser cavity. And the principal thing is you have to be able to control that very accurately to make it resonate. So we built piezoelectric transducers around the sides and capacitance sensors to measure how far apart the plates were, and astonishing to everybody, made this instrument work really rather well. Back in about 1978, I found myself on Saturday mornings soldering resistors into circuit boards. And we went over to the pub for lunch, and we were sitting in the pub, the Queen's Arms, as I remember, which is near the Royal Albert Hall, down one of those little mews. And we said, this is ridiculous. I'm supposed to be doing an academic career. Why am I doing this? And we said, we should form a company. Ha, 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 ha. You know, bit of a joke. We each put in 350 quid. There were 4 of us. By 1979, we were making products. This was the very first one. This box superseded the one you saw before. So instead of being this big, it was now this big. This actually was an empty box with the knob stuck on with double-sided tape, which I took on the number 9 bus down to an advertising agency in Piccadilly. Eventually we filled it full of electronics, but we had to have a brochure. We used all of the college's technicians on overtime, so they'd come in on Saturdays and do some machining for us, or wire up some circuit boards or whatever. And everything was kind of rolling along quite fine and dandy until one of the guys who bought one of our systems from us, a Canadian professor, was a principal investigator for an experiment on the space shuttle. The next thing we knew, we've got NASA saying, we want to put one of these on the space shuttle. Suddenly things got a bit serious. And I had to decide what to do, because I'd just been offered a tenured professorship in the United States. So I was thinking, well, am I going to do this? So I said to them, look, give me a year. Give me a year, and I'll come in a year's time, but I just got to get this thing going. And I never went. I never went. We had to build an organisation, who does what, and that started really when Tom came out of his office and said, I've done the deal. And I said to him, what deal? He said, the deal with NASA. I said, really? Oh. And what's the deal? He said, 250,000. I said, 250,000 what? Oh, he said, I don't know. I said, well, is it pounds? I said, well, we didn't say. I said, well, they're talking US dollars, they're not talking pounds, right? At which point Tom became technical director. It was very clear, Tom is now the technical director, and that contract was worth only 2/3 of what it might have been worth if we'd done it properly. So in 1985 we found ourselves with one big space contract and a load of interferometer orders for academics around the world doing astronomy. And I decided we had to have some other kind of product. And we didn't really want it to be all universities and space age. We needed something else. So I did this little technology audit, and we decided that we were very good at moving things very precisely, kind of nanometer precision positioning. But we didn't know who needed it. So we started building some prototypes. I started floating out brochures, what we call kissing frogs. And I kissed a lot of frogs. And we ended up selling test equipment to the data storage industry, surprisingly. So all of the heads on Seagate's disk drives were tested with Queensgate equipment. Back in 1982, we'd taken our interferometer, our big space, the big interferometer used for astronomy, and we'd miniaturized it because we thought somebody would use it in fiber optics. We didn't know what they would use it for. This is 1982, remember. So what we did was we put some fiber pigtails on it, as best we could. And it didn't work very well, but it was an interesting thing. And they came back to us in 1987, and we started making fibre-coupled versions of it, tiny little versions. We miniaturised it. What we didn't know was that the guy called David Payne at Southampton was inventing the optical fibre amplifier, which transformed the way fibre communications worked, because you could amplify light directly in a fibre. And suddenly, the whole fibre optic scene took off. So in July 1998, after a 3-day negotiation, I signed a $45 million supply contract with Lucid. Probably the hardest negotiation I'd ever done, and I was astonished by how difficult it was. We took a financing round of £2 million on a valuation of the company of $50 million. So we had money to expand. And then reality struck. We were ramping up. But there were delays. There were delays from Lucid in particular, because we started to argue over what the specs were. And then they stopped paying us. And by July 1999, we realized that Lucid were in trouble because they were building these big complex systems, but some other parts of the system didn't work. So they had all of the kit we'd supplied them with in their basements, in all of these huge racks of stuff that they weren't doing. And suddenly we were breaking our bank covenants. The credit committee of the National Westminster Bank decided that they weren't going to give us any more loans. So we started an auction. And before we knew it, there were 3 bids on the table. And in March 2000, we sold to SDL for $80 million in cash and stock, plus a 3-year earn-out worth a further $150 million. Now, I was blissfully happy with this. I thought, well, we'll never get the rest of it, but, you know, hey, we got out alive, you know, we got some money. I was thinking, well, it's cool, you know. And it was all a bit of an accident. I didn't mean to, you know, it wasn't part of my life plan, as you can see. I didn't plan this in some careful way. So since then, I've been focusing on university spin-outs in various ways. I've done 4, I've sold 2 of them. So I'm doing pretty well. My investment model is very simple. First of all, I have to understand it. I have to be there at the very beginning. I help spin them out. I invest pre-business plan. I have to craft the business plan, because the business plan usually doesn't survive first contact with the enemy, as they say. And I use my industry contacts and market knowledge to try and bring in a management team and guide the company. If I can't see that, then I don't do it. It's one of the strange benefits of getting older, is that the people that you knew when you were young get older too and become important. You know? I knew Mino Green when I was a student at Imperial, and he was a young professor. And so when I saw this presentation some 25, 30 years later, I went up to him and said, Mino, how are you? And it was like, oh, Paul, how are you? And he said, I've got this really fascinating technology for lithium-ion batteries. So I called 3 different people and said, I need somebody who knows something about lithium-ion batteries to tell me whether what Mino Green is talking about is a pile of horse shit or whether it's got some sense. You know? And all 3 people said the same thing. He said, you need to talk to Rob Neat. So Rob knew everybody. So I said to Rob, come, I'll pay you £1,000 for your time for the day, see what you think. So he came in, and Mino then lectured us, as he does, with a whiteboard and a great deal of contempt. He lectured us for about 3 hours, and Rob then said, Paul, if this stacks up, then it's the Holy Grail. And I said, right, we'll put some money in there. I said, but I want you to be my interim CEO. He said, yeah, I'll do it. So away we went. We're scaling up the material manufacture. We have joint development agreements with several large automotive and consumer electronics companies. And we've just taken an investment from Wacker Chemie, a big German chemical company that's a world expert in silicon. So, a few reflections for you on what the journey I've taken. And it echoes something of what Peter was saying before, really. That this is a very stimulating and absorbing and challenging and rewarding activity. At least it is if you're successful. It's about taking risks, and it's about leadership and vision, about being tough. It's actually a lot about being tough. And it's about being able to sleep. If you can't stare over the precipice every day and look at failure, then you shouldn't do it. People often ask me, can you teach people to be entrepreneurs? And I would say, well, you can teach some skills. You can train some things. But there's some things that you can't train. I mean, people have got to trust you. In a way, integrity is probably the most important thing that an entrepreneur can have, because people have got to believe in you and trust you. And it's also another thing that strikes me that you can't easily teach, which is the kind of can-do attitude. You know, I mean, I've flown to Japan and sat outside somebody's office for 3 days waiting to get a meeting. And other people say, oh, well, how would I get a meeting with that guy? And I said, well, just go. He doesn't answer the phone. I say, well, for God's sake, you know, if that's all you can do, then you really don't understand what it takes to be successful. But what it's not about is taking unnecessary risks. You know, I think of myself more as an experienced mountaineer who doesn't want to die and wants to climb carefully than I do thinking about myself as being a risk taker. Right? So, success comes from unexpected directions. And you heard with Proximagen that what made them successful was not the original ideas. How many times have I heard that? How many times have I seen, you know, Powderjet was sold for £700 million, but not because of its through-the-skin injection technology, but because it had a whole series of vaccination assets that somebody wanted. Intel in 1974 was making DRAM memory. And it had a little contract for making a calculator chip for a Japanese company. And when IBM came along, it ranked the IBM PC chip as number 74 in its list of future business. They didn't know what the future held. And as for helium neon lasers, which are now used in Marks and Spencer's when you scan your barcodes, you know, what a humble end for this fabulous world-changing technology that we all saw as science fiction. And then the other thing is that the hardest part of the businesses that I've developed has been the distribution channels. Not the technology, not the product, but actually finding people to sell your stuff in Japan, in Korea, in the United States, in China, that you can trust, that will work with you. And you get all these unexpected problems, but also unexpected opportunities. And that's the thing, really, that distinguishes successful companies from failures. It's the ability to recognize the unexpected opportunity that matches what you have. So what you call the technology, in my view, doesn't matter very much, because the issues are always the same. They're about people and an experienced adaptive management team. About a good product and strong IP if you can, good customers as opposed to bad customers. And by good customers I mean ones who will pay you even when your product doesn't work. And there are people like that out there. And they're usually big companies that pay on time. But you've still got to kiss a lot of frogs, and you've got to drown some puppies, to use another one as well. You've actually got to stop doing things in your cycle that you know, you've got to do things, stop doing some of the things that your pet projects, because actually you have to focus. So I'll leave you with this slide. Don't forget that the world's changing rapidly, that being best is insufficient and being first might be a disadvantage, that hiring good people is hard because they have to trust you, that making things is really, really, really hard, actually. Really, really, really hard. Selling is hard, and kissing frogs is unpleasant. And you might not even recognise a prince even when you find one. And you don't appreciate how much you don't understand. And I think if we did, probably none of us would have children, actually, if we understood what we were getting into, would we? But the longest journey begins with just a small step. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, I was interested, you talked about self-belief of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But you also talked about building teams of people you could trust.
Yes.
So how do you let that small group of people, how do you select them? And when do you start allowing them to challenge your own self-belief?
Well, I don't think the people that we selected were really, were broadly speaking, engineers and technologists. And the heart of the company in terms of the research and development activity stuck with the founders, with Tom Hicks and myself and Ken Ray, working together and really making all of the kind of serious breakthroughs. So there was never a challenge externally to that group, but there was plenty of challenge internally. There was lots of friction between the founders, frankly. Lots of friction, which is one of the reasons we had to sell in the end, because I think we'd kind of come to the end of our relationships.
Yeah.
My question to you is, what advice do you give to anyone who says, look, I really can't sell, or I'm not a salesperson, but I've got this great idea.
Well, I think most people misunderstand selling. I mean, I think most people think that selling is saying, buy one of these, buy one of these, but it's actually a persuasive process.
Indeed.
And I didn't realise I was good at it until I actually ended up selling things to people. I was just the explainer. My role was to say, this is our technology, this is how it works. And our distributors would sort of wheel me in front of different customers. So I mean, I used to do it every month. I'd do a one-week trip in the United States or a one-week trip in Japan. And the US trip used to be that they would collect me at Miami airport. We'd go and see IBM, Boca Raton. Then we'd fly up to Boston and they'd wheel me around 3 companies in Boston. And then we'd catch the late night flight to Minneapolis. And then the following day we'd do the same in Minneapolis and go to Seagate, and then we'd fly down to Phoenix, and I would just be wheeled around like a sack of potatoes by these guys, because I was the guy who explained to these engineers what our products did and how they worked. It wasn't a hard sell. It was a very soft sell. It was just, look, you know, I know how this works and I can help you use it. And so that kind of expertise sell is, I think, the way most academics would approach it, and not realise that they were selling.
You already got the IP. We do Drupal, and Drupal is easier, like Drupal is depends on what the time.
Today was interesting because it gave a more academic angle, really showing an honest story from a person who's come from an academic background.
I was searching for events of this kind in order to promote the competition that I'm working on at the moment, which is the Mayor's Low Carbon Prize, which this event is particularly relevant to because it is, well, one of the key facets of it is entrepreneurship and encouraging entrepreneurship. And it's a great opportunity to network with established entrepreneurs as well.
I'm an entrepreneur, and for their experience, it's great because it's exactly the same that I feel when I want to do something on your own.
Many people from university days, I can remember them coming around when I was at Thames Polytechnic, which is now University of Greenwich, with milk round, but nobody tell you how, okay, but if you don't get job or if you prefer to do something for yourself, these are the things and the places you could go to get kind of advice.
It's a pity that we don't have this in France.